The door opened like a wound. 8 years old, alone, Arizona winter biting through a jacket 2 sizes too small. And Nora Ellison walked into the Iron Verdict Motorcycle Club like she had nothing left to lose. Because she didn't. She clutched a stuffed wolf against her chest, its fur worn down to bare patches, one button eye missing. Her father had given it to her 3 weeks before the accident. She hadn't slept without it since. The music stopped. 40 men turned. Cigarette smoke hung in the air like something waiting to decide. She set the wolf on the bar. "I can't pay money," she said, "but I need someone to save my brother, and I think he's going to die tonight." Nobody laughed. Nobody moved. And in the silence that followed, something ancient and dangerous stirred in the chest of every man in that room. Some debts don't get paid in cash. Hey, if you're still watching, you already know this story isn't going to let you go. Hit that like button. Drop your city in the comments right now. I want to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. And don't you dare leave before the end. Because what these men do next changed everything. The wind off the Sonoran Desert had teeth that night. It came down from the Superstition Mountains in cold, invisible waves, pushing dead mesquite leaves across the empty highway like something restless was moving through the dark. The temperature had been dropping since sundown, and by 9 o'clock it had fallen below freezing, unusual even for December in this part of Arizona, where the days still carried enough warmth to trick people into forgetting how brutal the nights could get. The town of Dura Flats existed in the way a lot of small Arizona towns existed. Grudgingly, with a gas station that closed at 7, a diner that closed at 9, and a bar that never really closed at all. Between those 3 structures and about 40 manufactured homes spread across cracked caliche lots, that was Dura Flats. Population somewhere between 400 and not enough. Nora Ellison had been walking for 43 minutes. She knew the time because she'd checked her father's old watch before she left. The one she'd taken from the drawer in her mother's room, the one her mother didn't know she'd taken, the one that had been sitting under a stack of electric bills ever since the funeral. Her father's name had been carved into the back of the case in tiny letters, D. Ellison. She'd run her thumb across the engraving so many times the letters had started to smooth out. She kept the watch in her jacket pocket now, wrapped in a piece of flannel, and she checked it even when she didn't need to know the time, just to feel it there. Her boots were the wrong kind for cold pavement. They were canvas, purple, bought at the beginning of the school year when the weather was still reasonable and her mother was still having good weeks. The soles had started to separate at the toe on the left foot, and with every step she could feel the asphalt through a gap the size of her thumb. She'd tried taping it with duct tape before she left, but the tape had peeled away after the first half mile. Her toes had stopped hurting about 10 minutes ago, which she understood, in the vague, quiet way children understand things they haven't been taught yet, was not a good sign. She held the wolf against her chest with both arms. His name was Bishop. She'd named him that when she was 4, for reasons she couldn't remember anymore. Bishop had a scar down his left flank where the seam had come open and her father had sewn it back together with black thread, not matching thread, just whatever he'd had. And the black stitching stood out against the gray fur like a wound that had healed wrong. She'd always thought that made Bishop look tougher, more serious, like he'd been through something and kept going. She needed that right now. She needed Bishop to be tougher than she was. The Iron Verdict's clubhouse sat at the far end of what passed for Dura Flats commercial strip. A low concrete building with a flat roof, a hand-painted sign above the door that had weathered down to the point where the name was mostly readable only if you already knew what it said, and a parking lot that held 14 motorcycles in various states of assembly and maintenance. A string of red and orange lights ran along the roofline, and from half a mile away they glowed in the cold dark like something burning at a distance. Nora had walked toward those lights the entire way. She hadn't let herself look at anything else. She'd known about the Iron Verdict for as long as she'd lived in Dura Flats, which was her whole life. She knew what other people said about them. She knew her third-grade teacher, Mrs. Paulson, said they were dangerous men who made bad choices, and that her neighbor, Mrs. Chaffee, said the same thing in stronger language and crossed to the other side of the street when she saw their bikes parked outside the diner. She knew that Danny Ruiz at school said his older brother said they'd hurt a man so badly once that the man had moved out of the state and never come back. She'd filed all of this information away carefully, the way children file away information they don't have the context to evaluate yet. It lived in a specific drawer in her mind, behind everything more urgent. Tonight, there was nothing more urgent. Tonight, Rudy Holt was in the house with her mother and her brother Caleb, and the sounds she'd heard through the wall before she climbed out the bathroom window had been the kind of sounds she didn't have words for yet, hollow and rhythmic, and ending in a small voice crying out once and then going silent. And silence from Caleb was worse than crying. She had learned that 3 weeks ago. She had not stopped knowing it since. She pushed open the door of the Iron Verdict Motorcycle Club. The warmth hit her first, then the smoke, the amber bar light, the smell of motor oil and leather, and something frying somewhere in the back. Then the noise. 3 conversations, a pool game, someone's boots on a wooden floor, a television above the bar cycling through a highlight reel with the sound turned low. All of it suspended in the air like weather, like its own specific atmosphere that had been building in this room for years. And then she stepped fully inside, and something in the room shifted. It happened the way a change in pressure happens. Not a sound, not a visible movement, but a change in everything at once. The conversation stopped. The pool cue stopped mid-stroke. The man at the bar turned, then the man beside him, then the cluster of 4 around the nearest table, and within 10 seconds, every face in the room was pointed at the small girl standing in the doorway with a stuffed wolf in purple canvas boots and a look on her face that none of them had ever seen on a child that age. Not fear exactly. Something past fear. Something that had decided. She walked to the bar. Her boots were loud on the concrete floor. She counted 9 steps. She set Bishop on the bar carefully, making sure he was sitting upright, both button eyes visible. Well, the one remaining button eye and the smooth patch where the other one had been. She put her hands flat on the bar on either side of him and looked up at the man standing behind it. He was not the man she'd expected, though she wasn't sure what she'd expected. He was in his 40s, wide through the chest, with a jaw like something hewn rather than grown, and a scar that ran from the corner of his left eye down to his chin in a pale diagonal line. He wore a leather vest over a gray thermal, and the patch on the chest said Sergeant at Arms. His expression when he looked at her was difficult to read, not hostile, not warm, just watchful. The way a person looks when they've learned to gather information before committing to a reaction. "I can't pay money," Nora said. She'd rehearsed this part the whole walk over, but her voice came out smaller than she'd intended, tight around the edges. She swallowed and tried again. "But I have Bishop, and if someone will help me tonight, you can keep him." No one spoke. "My brother is 5, she said. "His name is Caleb. He can't walk right now because of what happened last week, and he needs—" Her voice snagged. She pressed her teeth together until it passed. "He needs someone to go get him, before tonight gets worse." The man behind the bar didn't move. His eyes went to Bishop, then back to her face. Something moved in them that she couldn't name. "Who's hurting him?" he said. It wasn't a question. "My mom's boyfriend, Rudy Holt." She said the name the way you say a piece of glass, carefully, aware of every edge. "He's been there since 7. My mom she can't make him stop. She tries, but she can't." She stopped, started again. "Nobody can make him stop." From somewhere in the room, a chair scraped back. She didn't look. She kept her eyes on the man behind the bar. "Where's your house?" the man said. 14 Coyote Lane, the one with the blue mailbox. He broke the flag off it in October." Another silence. Then a door at the back of the room opened and a different kind of presence entered, a different weight to the air. Nora turned. The man who came through that door was not the tallest person she'd ever seen, but he was the most still. That was the first thing she noticed. Absolute stillness in a room that had been full of movement seconds before. He was maybe 50, lean in the way that suggested not a lack of food, but a long expenditure of energy, wearing a vest over a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows despite the cold. Both forearms carried the kind of marks that came from a long time ago. She could see them from 8 feet away, faded and complicated, military and otherwise. His hair was cut close, going gray at the temples. His eyes were the color of river water over stones, and they went directly to her face and stayed there. On his vest, above the left breast pocket, President. Below that, in smaller letters, Griff. He walked to the bar and stopped 2 feet from her. He didn't look at Bishop. He looked at her face, and then, slowly, in a way that telegraphed the movement so she wouldn't startle, his eyes moved to her arms, to the sleeves of her jacket. Nora had pulled the sleeves down before she left the house. She always pulled them down. She was careful. But she'd been walking in the cold for 43 minutes with a stuffed animal pressed against her chest, and somewhere in the last half-mile the left sleeve had ridden up, and she hadn't noticed. Griff noticed. He didn't say anything. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes went very quiet and very certain, the way a decision goes quiet once it's actually made. He looked at her face again. "How long has your brother not been able to walk?" he said. "Since Saturday." It was Wednesday. She watched him do the math. "Have you told anybody?" "I told Mrs. Paulson at school. She called somebody, a county number. They said they'd send someone to do a check. Nobody came." She hesitated. "I told her again on Monday. She said the county was backed up and that sometimes kids make things bigger than they are." Her voice was flat saying this. Completely flat. "I told the lady at the gas station. She said it sounded like a family matter." Griff held her gaze for a long moment. "Your sleeve," he said quietly. She looked at her left arm, pulled it down. "Nora," he said. She looked up. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't moved. "Is anyone else hurt at that house right now?" She thought about the sound she'd heard through the wall, the silence after. "Yes," she said. He turned away from her, not fast, not slow, just turned, and the room behind him was already changing. She heard the clatter of pool cues being set down, heard the scrape of chairs, her jackets being pulled off the backs of those chairs and shrugged on. She heard keys. She heard the clunk of heavy boots on that floor changing from idle to purposeful, that specific change in rhythm that means people have somewhere to go. The woman came out of nowhere. She appeared at Nora's left elbow like she'd been there all along, somewhere in her 30s, with close-cropped dark hair and a scar of her own on her chin, smaller than Griff's, like a punctuation mark. Her vest said Road Captain, and beneath that Mara. She sat down on the bar stool next to Nora, not looming over her, not crouching to her level in the way adults did when they were performing concern, just sat so they were roughly eye to eye and looked at her directly. "You walked here alone," Mara said. "Yes." "How far?" "About 1.5 miles." Mara looked at her boots, at the left one specifically, at the place where the sole was separating. Her expression was perfectly controlled, but her jaw tightened for just a moment, just a fraction, before she smoothed it back. "You cold?" "Some. My feet mostly." Mara stood up. "Come with me." She picked up Bishop from the bar and held him out. "Take him. That wasn't a trade. That was just you getting in the door." Nora took Bishop. Something that had been locked up behind her sternum all evening shifted, just slightly. She didn't cry. She wasn't going to cry, but she held Bishop against her chest and followed Mara toward the back of the room, and behind her she could hear the whole club moving, not with panic, not with chaos, but with the terrible quiet efficiency of people who had done hard things before and knew how to do them again. The back room was smaller than the main one and smelled like coffee and gun oil. There was a couch, a table with a police scanner on it, a pegboard with keys, and on the couch, a woman of maybe 60 with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead who looked at Nora over the top of them and didn't say anything alarming. Her name was Birch, Nora would learn later. She was the club's unofficial medic, and she had hands that were entirely calm in any situation. "Feet," Birch said, pointing at the floor. Nora sat down and took off her boots. Birch pressed her fingers lightly against Nora's toes and watched her face. "Can you feel that?" "Not much." Birch nodded, unsurprised. She produced a pair of wool socks from somewhere and a pair of slip-on camp shoes, 2 sizes too large, and she put them on Nora's feet without making it feel like a mercy. In the main room, the sound of bikes starting up came through the walls in a rolling wave. 1 engine, then 2, then the rest in rapid succession, that low Harley thunder that you felt in your back teeth. Nora counted 6 separate engines by sound. The sound grew and then receded, moving north toward Coyote Lane, toward the blue mailbox, toward Caleb. She sat with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. Real coffee, not child-appropriate anything, and she drank it without comment because she was 8 years old and the situation seemed to call for it. And she listened to the scanner and the wind outside and Birch's breathing, and she did not let herself think about what she'd heard through the wall before she climbed out the window. Mara came back in after 20 minutes. She sat across from Nora with her forearms on her knees and her hands loose between them. "They're there," she said. "Griff says your brother's okay. He's scared, but he's okay." She paused. "Your mom, too." Nora exhaled. She hadn't known she was holding it. "And Rudy?" Mara looked at her steadily. "He ran, which is fine. Running means he's scared." Something moved in her voice, a flat, quiet certainty. People like that, when they get scared, they make mistakes. "He'll come back. He might try to. He always comes back." Mara held her gaze for a moment. "Not this time," she said. "That's a promise." And she said it the way Nora's father used to say certain things. Not loudly, not with reassurance in his voice, but with a weight behind the words that meant she'd thought it through before she said it, and she didn't say things she hadn't thought through. Nora drank her coffee. Outside, the wind was still moving through the desert, still finding gaps in things, under doors, around window frames, through the places where seams had come apart. But inside the back room of the Iron Verdict Motorcycle Club, under the warm amber light, sitting in camp shoes 2 sizes too large with a stuffed wolf in her lap, Nora Ellison felt, for the first time in 11 months and 13 days since the last night her father had been alive, something that was not fear, something that was not relief exactly, something closer to the first breath you take after being held underwater. She didn't know these men. She didn't know this woman across from her with the road captain patch and the careful eyes. She only knew that she'd walked 43 minutes in the cold with a broken boot and a worn-out stuffed animal, and instead of nothing, something had happened. Someone had moved. That was everything. That was more than everything. That was the whole world. Griff came in 2 hours later, smelling of cold air and exhaust. He sat down in the chair across from Nora, who had, at some point in the preceding hour, fallen sideways on the couch, with Bishop under her cheek and gone completely unconscious, and looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at Mara. Mara handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it, read it. His face didn't change, but his jaw moved once, the way a jaw moves when a person is processing something that requires control to process. "Same guy?" he said. "Scanner picked it up 40 minutes ago. Walton County Dispatch." Mara's voice was low, even. "Rudy Holt, prior domestic, 2 counts. Pled down both times. There's a third one that never made it to filing." She paused. "The third one was from 5 years ago. Other county. Different woman." Another pause. "There was a child involved." Griff was quiet for a long time. Outside, the last bike had gone silent. The scanner murmured. Bishop's one remaining button eye caught the light. "The boy," Griff said finally. "Cracked rib. At least 1, maybe 2. Doc thinks it happened last week, consistent with what she said." Mara folded her arms. "He's been hurting for 4 days, Griff. She's been trying to get someone to listen for 4 days." Griff looked at the sleeping girl, at the sleeve that had ridden up again while she slept, showing what was underneath. He looked for exactly 2 seconds, and then he looked away. "Pull Holt's known associates," he said. "Everything. I want to know who he runs with, where he goes when he disappears, and who let him walk out of that courtroom twice." "Already on it." Mara moved toward the door, then stopped. "What about the kids?" Griff looked at Nora again, at Bishop's careful black stitching. "Nobody touches them," he said. "Nobody. Not him, not the system, not anybody." He said it quietly, without inflection, the way a man states something that is simply and completely true. "They walked in here. That means something." Mara nodded once and left. The scanner kept murmuring. The wind kept working at the building's edges. Nora slept. And in the darkness of Dura Flats, in a direction the scanner hadn't mentioned yet, a phone rang in a house that nobody was watching, and Rudy Holt answered it. And the voice on the other end of the line said 3 words that Griff, if he'd been able to hear them, would have recognized immediately as the sound of something much worse than a single angry man running scared through the desert. 3 words that meant Rudy Holt wasn't the beginning of something. He was just a symptom. Griff would learn what those words were by morning. And when he did, the thing that had started in the iron verdict with a little girl and a stuffed wolf would become something larger, darker, and more dangerous than anyone in that room had understood when they swung their legs over their bikes and roared out into the cold Arizona night. But Nora didn't know that yet. She slept with Bishop against her cheek, and the wool socks on her feet, and the camp shoes on the floor beside the couch, and for those few hours, she was just a child, just a small person suspended in the quiet country between one hard thing and the next. And that too was something. That too was a kind of mercy, even if it wouldn't last. The morning came gray and sharp, the kind of Arizona winter morning that fooled nobody. Clear sky that gave you nothing, sun that looked warmer than it was, shadows still carrying the night's cold like something they hadn't finished with yet. Nora woke to the smell of actual food. Eggs, maybe. Bacon. She sat up and looked around the back room, disoriented for exactly 3 seconds before everything flooded back in order. Bathroom window, the walk, the wolves painted on the wall outside, Bishop on the bar, Griff's eyes going to her sleeve. She pulled her sleeve down automatically, even though it was morning and she was alone in the room and there was no one to hide from. Some habits don't wait for context. Birch appeared in the doorway with a plate, toast, eggs, a glass of orange juice. "Eat," she said, and set it on the table beside the couch. "Where's my brother?" Nora said. "Room next door. Still sleeping." Birch's voice was the kind of calm that came from long practice with difficult situations. "Your mom's here too. She's resting." A pause that contained several things Birch didn't say. Nora ate. The eggs were good. She didn't know why that surprised her, but it did. That inside this building, in this room that smelled like oil and coffee and decades of hard living, someone had made eggs that were exactly right. Not too wet, not rubbery, just exactly right. She was halfway through the toast when she heard voices in the main room. Griff's, recognizable by the weight of it. Mara's, lower and faster. A third voice she didn't know, male, maybe 40, with a flat Midwestern cadence that had moved a long way from wherever it started. She couldn't make out the words, but she could hear the texture of the conversation, the careful, deliberate quality of people reviewing something terrible and deciding what to do about it. She set down the toast. Birch was watching her. "They figured something out," Nora said. It wasn't a question. Birch studied her for a moment. "You're a sharp kid. My dad used to say information is safer than not having it." She picked up the toast again. "Even when it's bad. Your dad sounds like he was a smart man." "He was." She said it without cracking. She'd had 11 months and 13 days to practice saying it without cracking. Birch sat down in the chair across from her and folded her hands on her knee. "Nora, what do you know about Rudy Holt? Not what he did. What you know about who he is. Where he came from." Nora considered this. "He showed up in April. Mom met him at the diner where she worked. He was nice at first. He did things, like fixed the truck, brought groceries." She paused. "He had a phone that he kept in a separate bag, and he never let anyone near it. I noticed that in May. He caught me looking at it once." She touched her left arm without thinking about it. "He had other phones too, different ones. I only saw them twice." Birch was very still. "Did you tell anyone about the phones?" "I told the lady from the county when she finally came in November. She wrote it down. She didn't seem interested." Nora met Birch's gaze. Should she have been interested? Birch looked at her for a moment. "Yes," she said. "She should have been very interested." She stood up. "Finish your eggs. I need to go talk to Griff." She was through the door in 4 steps. Nora finished her eggs. Through the wall, she could hear Caleb starting to wake up. The small sounds of a 5-year-old orienting himself to an unfamiliar place, the preliminary sounds before the question-asking started. She carried her plate to the small counter by the back sink and rinsed it, because that was what you did, and then she went to the room next door. Caleb was sitting up on a cot with a blanket around him and his eyes very wide. He had their father's eyes, that same gray-brown changeable color, water over stones. He also had a bruise that ran from his left cheekbone down to the jaw, yellowing at the edges, which meant it was several days old, which meant it had been there when he went to school on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, and no one at his school had mentioned it, had called anyone, had done the thing that was supposed to be done. Nora sat down beside him on the cot, and he immediately pressed himself against her side. "Where are we?" he said. "Safe place." "Where's Mom?" "Resting. She's okay." Caleb looked at the unfamiliar room. At the door. At the window, which showed a slice of gray sky and the corner of a motorcycle tarp. "Are there bikers here?" he said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He was 5, but he was a particular kind of 5. The kind that happens when a child has had to be older than 5 for a while. "Are they nice bikers?" Nora thought about Griff's face when he looked at her sleeve, about Mara's voice saying not this time, about the sound of 6 engines turning over in the dark and heading toward Coyote Lane. "Yeah," she said, "they're nice bikers." He leaned against her, still cautious, still watching the door. "Is Rudy gone?" "Yes." "Is he coming back?" "No," she said. She said it the same way Mara had said it, with the weight behind it, not the reassurance, the certainty. Caleb was quiet for a little while. Then, "I'm hungry. I'll get you eggs." She stood up and he grabbed the edge of her jacket for a second before letting go. She went to get him eggs, and in the main room, as she passed through, she caught a fragment of the conversation at the table, Griff's voice, low and absolutely level, and 2 words that she didn't understand the full shape of yet, but that would stay with her for weeks, working their way through her memory like glass working its way to the surface of a healing wound. Holt's courier. She heard those words. She filed them away. She didn't know yet what they meant, or who he'd been carrying for, or how far that network ran, or how many other people had phones in separate bags that county workers weren't interested in. She would. By noon, she would know enough to understand that Rudy Holt hadn't walked into their lives randomly, and by nightfall, she would understand that whatever was coming next, it was going to take more than one night to stop it. The eggs were good again. That helped. It didn't help enough. But in a house with a broken blue mailbox and no more violence in it, her brother ate scrambled eggs in a room that smelled like oil and coffee, and for the first time in a long time, the morning held. Then Griff came through the door with Mara behind him, and the look on his face told Nora, in the specific wordless language that children learn when they've had to read adult faces very carefully for a long time, that the world was larger and darker than even she had calculated, and that the next move was his, and that he was already making it. Griff Voss had not slept. This was not unusual. Sleep had been a complicated proposition for Griff since Fallujah, and later since the valley east of Kandahar, and later since the thing that happened in a Phoenix parking garage that he didn't discuss with anyone, and that was listed in no official record anywhere. Sleep came in increments for him. 90 minutes here, 2 hours there, the body taking what it could, and the mind doing whatever the mind did in the hours when it was supposed to be quiet, but wasn't. He had learned to function on this. He had learned to take the fatigue and press it down to a place where it became something more useful, a kind of fuel, the way a long cold night becomes useful if you know how to read it. He'd been at the table since 3 a.m. with Mara and a man named Priest, who was not a religious man and had earned the name in a different kind of ceremony than the obvious one, and who was the closest thing the Iron Verdict had to an intelligence officer. Priest had spent 11 years with Army intelligence before his discharge, and another 6 working investigative roles he didn't name specifically, and he had a particular gift for connecting information that appeared unconnected. He'd been on his 4th coffee by the time the sun came up, and what he'd laid out on the table in the hour before Birch came through the door was not the story of one violent man in a manufactured home in Dura Flats. It was the outline of something systematic. Rudy Holt had priors in 3 states. Not just the domestic charges that had been filed and pled down. Those were recent, local, almost incidental. Underneath them, older and more carefully erased, were connections to a network Priest recognized from intelligence work he'd done in a past life. A freight network with a separate operation running inside it. Devices registered to shell addresses, cash payments to housing brokers in 4 Arizona counties, and 2 in New Mexico. The phones, the separate bag, the county worker who hadn't been interested. He wasn't the architect, Priest said, tapping a line of notes on the legal pad in front of him. He was placement. Moving people. Maybe materials. Staying in situations, domestic situations. To maintain access to targets. He stopped. To children. Griff had been very still for a long time after that. Mara's hands, folded on the table, had gone very white at the knuckles. How wide? Griff said. Wide. Priest turned the legal pad so Griff could see the diagram he'd drawn. Nodes and lines, names and locations, half of them question marks. What Nora walked in with last night wasn't just an abusive boyfriend. It was an entry point. Griff looked at the diagram. He looked at it for a long time. Then we don't close this when Holt comes back into custody, he said. No, Priest said. We don't. Griff stood up from the table, and the act of standing had a specific quality. Not urgency, not anger, but that particular deliberateness that was its own kind of statement. He put his hand flat on the legal pad for a moment, not looking at it. We follow it, he said. All of it, wherever it goes. Mara looked at him across the table. She knew what that meant. She knew what it would cost. Not just in risk, but in the specific accumulated cost of returning to the kind of work that left marks that didn't show up on skin. She'd seen what it had done to Griff the first time, 4 years ago. A different situation in a different state with a different outcome that still lived in the place behind his eyes, where the river watercolor went dark. You should sleep first, she said. After, he said. She didn't argue. She knew after. When Birch came through the door with what Nora had said about the phones, the separate bag, the multiple devices, the county worker who'd written it down and moved on, Griff listened without expression. When she finished, he nodded once. Get Priest back in here, he said. Priest came back in. The diagram got larger, and outside in the gray Arizona morning, the wind had shifted direction, coming now from the west instead of the mountains, carrying something warmer and something that smelled like rain coming. The bikers in the parking lot moved tarps, checked tie-downs, drank coffee in the cold. One of them, a man named Trace, who was 26 and had been with the club for 2 years and had a daughter in Tucson, he drove to see every other Sunday, stood outside with his mug and looked north toward Coyote Lane and felt something that he didn't have exact words for. Something about a girl walking 1.5 miles with a broken boot. Something about what that required. Something about what it meant that she'd done it and gotten here and found people who'd moved. He drank his coffee and looked at the sky and thought about his daughter, who was 7 and whose name was Lily, and who had never, not once, had to walk towards something frightening alone. And he thought about what you owed for that. What you owed to the children who didn't have what Lily had. He finished his coffee and went inside. He told Griff he was in for whatever came next. He was the third one to say so that morning. He wouldn't be the last. By midday, the iron verdict had begun to move, quietly, methodically, with the kind of intentionality that had nothing to do with anger and everything to do with direction. They moved the way people move when they've decided something and the decision isn't reversible. They made calls to people who owed them, pulled threads from old cases, mapped Holt's movements backward through 6 months of records that nobody had thought to pull together. They found things. They found a lot of things. And what they found told them that Rudy Holt, somewhere out in the Arizona desert with his fear and his burner phone, had already made the call that was going to make the next few days very, very dangerous for him. And if Priest's diagram was right, for the people at the other end of that call, and for the iron verdict, whether they wanted it or not. Nora was in the back room with Caleb when she heard Griff's voice change, a particular change, not in volume, but in cadence, the shift from deliberate to urgent. And she looked at her brother, who had fallen asleep again against her shoulder with a half-eaten piece of toast in his hand, and she moved him carefully to the pillow. She stood in the doorway of the main room and watched. Priest was on the phone. Griff was looking at the diagram. Mara was pulling a jacket on. 3 more bikers were already at the door. Nobody was running. Nobody was shouting. There was just that terrible, quiet movement, that efficiency, that she'd seen the night before when they'd all stood up and pulled their jackets on and gone to Coyote Lane. Only this time, they weren't going to Coyote Lane. This time, they were going somewhere farther. She watched Griff. He looked up and saw her in the doorway. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the room. "Stay with Birch," he said. "I know," she said. He held her gaze for another second. There was something in his face. She couldn't name it exactly, this close to it, but she would understand it later, much later, when she was older and had the vocabulary for it. It was the look of a person who has found, in the middle of something hard, the exact reason why it matters, the specific weight that makes the cost bearable. He turned away. The bikes started up. The sound of them rolled through the walls and through the floor and through Nora's chest, that low gathered thunder, and then it was moving, north, then west, then fading into the gray Arizona morning until she couldn't hear it anymore. Just the wind, just the scanner, just Caleb breathing in the next room. And on the table, where Priest had been sitting, the legal pad with the diagram, the nodes and the lines and the half-named question marks. And at the bottom, circled twice in red, a single location, a single name. A name she didn't recognize, but that she would remember for a very long time. What? 40 miles west, Rudy Holt sat in the passenger seat of a truck he hadn't been driving for 3 hours, watching the desert move past the window, and answered a question the man driving had asked him. "Yeah," he said. "She found the bikers." A silence. "All of them?" "I don't know. Enough of them." Another silence, longer. The driver's hands on the wheel were completely steady. He was not the kind of man who showed things in his hands. "You should have been more careful," the driver said. "I know." "The girl. She's 8. She doesn't know anything." The driver was quiet for a very long time. The desert moved. "She knows enough," he said finally. She walked to them. "That's enough." Holt looked out the window. "What do we do?" he said. The driver didn't answer for a moment. When he did, his voice was entirely calm. "We make sure," he said, "that the bikers have a reason to stop." Holt didn't ask what that meant. He'd learned not to ask what things meant when the driver said them in that voice. He looked out at the desert. He thought about the girl with the stuffed wolf. He thought about the look on her face when she'd set it on the bar. He thought, this thought arriving unexpected, unwelcome, and quickly suppressed, that she'd had her father's eyes. He'd seen a photo of the father, once, before the accident, before everything. He pressed the thought down. The truck moved west. The desert moved east. And somewhere in the distance, growing louder now, or maybe that was just the wind, was the sound of engines, coming this way. The truck Rudy Holt was riding in had a cracked dashboard and a pine air freshener that had gone scentless weeks ago, and the man driving it had not offered his name and Holt had not asked for it. That was the arrangement. That had always been the arrangement. You worked adjacent to these people, never with them, never inside them. And you kept your questions to yourself and your usefulness high, and your profile low. And in exchange, they left you alone to run your piece of the operation the way you needed to run it. Holt had understood this for 2 years. He'd been good at it for almost that long. He'd stopped being good at it the night an 8-year-old girl walked into a biker clubhouse with a stuffed toy. The driver's name, Holt knew from secondhand information he'd gathered and never asked to confirm, was Carver. Not a first name, not a last name, just Carver, the way certain men arrived at a single word that suited them better than anything else. Carver was 52 or 53, which was hard to tell exactly because his face had the kind of weathered quality that stopped aging visibly somewhere around 45. He wore a flannel shirt under a canvas work coat and drove with one hand on the wheel, unhurried, the way a man drives who has never once in his adult life been pulled over and knows he won't be. He had not asked Holt any further questions after the one about the girl. That silence had been building for 40 minutes now. It was the specific quality of silence that Holt had learned to interpret over the course of 2 years as the most dangerous kind. Not angry silence, not thoughtful silence, something colder. The silence of a man constructing options. "Where are we going?" Holt said finally. "Somewhere you can wait." "Wait for what?" "For the situation to clarify." Holt turned back to the window. The desert west of Dura Flats was flatter than the desert to the north and east, less dramatic, less obviously brutal, the kind of emptiness that didn't announce itself, just space, just distance, just the low scrub going pale in the winter light. They'll track the plate, Holt said. They won't find the plate. Carver changed lanes without checking his mirror. That's not the problem. Then what is? The problem, Carver said, is what the girl saw and what she told. She saw my phones and told someone who told the bikers. Carver was quiet for a moment. Which means within 6 hours, the bikers told someone who knows what to look for, which means this moves faster than I'd like. He adjusted his grip on the wheel. One hand, always that same unhurried control. Which means you've compressed my timeline significantly, Rudy. Holt said nothing. The operation in the valley, Carver said. The one you were maintaining access for, what's the current status? Active as of Tuesday. The secondary location in Pinal County. Active. 2 weeks from cycling. Carver nodded slowly. Then we have 2 weeks. To do what? Carver looked at him for the first time since they'd gotten in the truck. Just a glance, level and entirely without warmth. To finish, he said, or to burn it. He looked back at the road. Holt looked at his hands. He thought about the girl again. Against his will. The way she'd stood at the bar with her sleeves pulled down. The way she'd put the toy on the counter like a contract, like a thing she was prepared to give away, and hadn't trembled doing it. He pressed that down too. The truck kept moving west. Okay. By the time Griff's convoy reached the junction at Route 87, they'd been riding for 50 minutes through a cold that came straight off the mountains and didn't negotiate. 6 bikes, 2 of them trailing back by a quarter mile in a loose formation that was less aesthetic than tactical. Keeping separation on the open road, each rider able to react independently if something came toward them from either direction. It was a habit from a long time ago, before motorcycles, before Arizona, before any of this. It was the kind of habit that didn't come out in traffic or on short runs. It surfaced on open roads at speed and cold air when the stakes were what they were, and it happened automatically, without discussion, because the men who rode with Griff had their own versions of the same habits and recognized them in each other. Priest had called ahead. He always called ahead. It was one of the 3 things Griff trusted Priest to do without supervision, the other 2 being research and the maintenance of a specific set of contacts that existed in a world adjacent to law enforcement, but not inside it. The contact in this case was a man named Delgado, formerly with a federal task force that had been defunded and reorganized into something less useful, who now ran what he called a private investigative consultancy out of an office above a tire shop in Coolidge. Delgado was meticulous, cautious to the point of paranoia, and had seen enough of what Priest's diagram described to treat the subject with the kind of weight it deserved. He was waiting for them in the parking lot behind the tire shop when they pulled in, collar up, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the bikes come around the corner with an expression that was professional neutrality over something else, something that looked like relief, which surprised Griff until it didn't. They went inside. The office above the tire shop was small, warm, and covered in the particular archaeology of someone who'd been working a specific problem for a long time. Papers, maps, photographs attached to a corkboard with colored string, a laptop with 3 browser windows open, 2 empty coffee cups and one that was still steaming. The string on the corkboard was the same color throughout. There was no color coding system. Delgado had explained this to Griff once. When everything's connected, color coding creates false hierarchies. Griff looked at the board. He recognized 2 names from Priest's diagram. The others were new to him. Holt, he said. Courier and placement, Delgado said, confirming what Priest had found. We've had eyes on him peripherally for 14 months. He was one node in a structure we couldn't find the center of. He moved to the board and tapped a photograph. A man Griff didn't recognize, taken from a distance, blurred at the edges. Holt connects upward to Carver. Carver connects upward to something we don't have a name for yet. We have a structure, we have locations, we don't have the architecture. What does Carver run? Access. He brokers access to housing situations, to placement positions, to the systems that are supposed to prevent it. Delgado paused. He's been doing this for at least 7 years, probably longer. The evidence trail before that is either gone or never existed. Mara was standing to Griff's left. Her arms were crossed. The expression on her face was the one she wore when she was keeping something very controlled and very deliberate. Not blank, but managed. Griff knew that expression. He'd seen it the night in Oklahoma 3 years ago, and before that in the situation in Belen that nobody talked about anymore. "The kids at the Coyote Lane house," she said. "Were they—" She stopped. "No," Delgado said. He said it quickly and with the kind of certainty that meant he'd already checked, that he'd checked it the moment Priest called him with the address. Holt was maintaining access, positioning for future operation. He hadn't— He stopped too. The children were targets, not victims. Not yet. The room was very quiet for a moment. "The mother," Griff said. "Chemical control. Prescription medication, dosage manipulation. She's been being managed for at least 4 months. Her own doctor prescribed what Holt gave her access to." Delgado shook his head. "The doctor may be a knowing participant. He may be a fool. I don't know which yet." Griff moved to the corkboard. He stood in front of it for a long time, hands loose at his sides, reading the string, the connection points, the gaps, the question marks. "Carver's current location," he said. "Unknown. Moving. He's smart. Changes vehicles. Pays cash. Doesn't pattern." Delgado pulled a sheet from the desk. "But we have 2 active sites he's connected to. One in Pinal County. A structure, possibly residential. One in the valley. I have addresses." Griff turned. 2 sites, he said. 2 weeks, maybe less, before Carver decides to close them. If Holt told him about the exposure, which Holt almost certainly did, then yes, less. Griff looked at Mara. She looked back. The thing between them in that look wasn't a conversation. It was shorter than a conversation. It was the acknowledgement of a thing already decided, a direction already taken, and what it was going to cost to go all the way down it. They'd had this kind of exchange before. Not often, but enough that they both knew the grammar of it. Griff looked at the men behind him, Trace, Huck, Doyle, Reyes, each of them watching him with that same quality of stillness he'd seen in the parking lot that morning, each of them having already calculated the answer to the question he hadn't asked yet. "We follow the string," he said. Not loud. "All of it." Nobody argued. Nobody looked away. The drive back to Dura Flats was harder than the drive out. Not the road. The road was the same. The miles were the same. But riding back with Delgado's addresses and Priest's phone and Carver's photograph in Griff's memory was a different weight than the weight of not knowing, and different didn't mean lighter. It meant specific. Specific weight distributed across the chest and the shoulders and the place between the shoulder blades where tension accumulated, where old wounds from old operations announced themselves quietly on cold days. Griff rode point and didn't speak on the radio. He thought about Nora. He didn't do this deliberately. It arrived the way certain thoughts arrived, without announcement. The image of her at the bar, sleeves pulled down. The image of her face in the back room after he'd come in from the cold, not afraid, not collapsed, just alert, just watching, just already doing the math on what she could see and what she couldn't and what it meant. He thought about a girl who'd walked 43 minutes in a broken boot to reach people most adults cross the street to avoid. And he thought about what that required, what it cost her, what she'd calculated and then done anyway. He thought about another child, an earlier child in an earlier city, in an earlier part of his life, when he'd still believed that the right structures in place would catch the people who fell through, when he'd still believed that belief itself was enough. He'd been wrong about that. He'd been wrong in a way that wasn't recoverable, and the wrongness of it had lived behind his eyes ever since, in that place where the river water went dark. He hadn't walked into a situation like this one since then. He was in one now. He pressed the throttle down and the Harley opened up on the empty highway, cold air hitting his face like a flat hand, and he let the sound of the engine fill up the space where the thinking was happening, and he rode. At the clubhouse, the situation had changed. He could tell before he parked. Birch was standing outside the front door, which she never did, which meant something inside required space for the person who was outside to process. She looked at him when he pulled in, and the look said, complicated, not dangerous. Complicated. He cut the engine. "She awake," he said. "Both of them. The boy's okay. Eating again." Birch paused. "The mother's awake." He waited. She wants to leave, Birch said. She wants to take the kids and go back to the house. Griff looked at the door. She understands what Holt was. I told her she's... Birch searched for the right word with the precision of someone who used words carefully. She's not entirely herself yet, the medication. It's going to take a week, maybe more, before she's thinking all the way through. But she's frightened and she doesn't know us, and she wants the thing that's familiar, even if the thing that's familiar was hurting her. She paused. She's asked for Nora twice. The second time wasn't calm. Griff pulled off his gloves. The cold had worked all the way into his knuckles. He pressed them against his thigh and felt nothing useful. Where's Nora? Sitting outside the room. Waiting. Of course she was. He went inside. The clubhouse in daytime had a different character than the clubhouse at night. Less atmospheric, more functional, the neon signs dark and the bar unoccupied and the pool table covered. In this light it looked like what it was, a working space for people who worked hard and didn't have a lot of softness in their lives. Worn furniture, useful furniture, the archaeology of many years of men fixing things and planning things and sitting with each other in the specific way men sat with each other when there was nothing to say, and they needed to be in the same room anyway. Nora was in the hallway outside the room where her mother was. She was sitting on the floor with her back against the wall and Bishop in her lap and her father's watch in her hands, turning it over and over. She looked up when Griff came down the hallway. She didn't ask him anything. She just watched him the way she watched everything, taking inventory. How long has she been up? He said. About an hour. She's scared. Nora turned the watch over once more. She gets like this when she's scared. She wants to go back to the things she knows. She paused. Rudy used to tell her that nobody else would help her, that nobody else would want to. He said it a lot. She said this with the flat effect of a child reporting information, not editorializing, just the facts of what she'd heard and stored. I think she might believe it still. Griff crouched down to her level. His knees made a sound. Your mom's name, he said. Diane. She paused. She used to be different. Before the pills. Before Rudy. She looked down at the watch. She used to make breakfast on Saturdays and let us watch whatever we wanted. She used to argue with Dad about dumb stuff and laugh about it. She used to be... She stopped, started again differently. She's still in there. She's just buried right now. Griff was quiet for a moment. I know, he said, and he said it in the way of a person who was not offering comfort, but offering recognition. The specific, non-performative recognition of someone who knew exactly what buried looked like and had some experience watching it surface again, slowly, imperfectly, over time. He stood up. Stay here, he said. He knocked on the door and went in. The woman on the other side of that door, Diane Ellison, 34 years old, a diner waitress before Rudy Holt had moved through her life like weather, was sitting on the edge of the cot with her hands pressed between her knees, and she looked at Griff when he came in with the particular expression of someone who is not sure whether to run. Not because of him specifically, just because running had been the operating mode for long enough that the body defaulted to it now. She was thin in the way that wasn't natural, her eyes tracking too fast, her coloring still off from whatever Holt had been putting in, whatever he'd been giving her. But underneath all of that, the chemical interference, the fear, the months of managed reality, there was someone. Griff could see the shape of her. He sat down in the chair across from her, left the door open, didn't lean forward, didn't perform anything. Mrs. Ellison, he said, I'm Griff Voss. I run this club. She looked at him. I want my kids. They're here. They're safe. I'll take you to them in 2 minutes. He said it without condescension, without the tone of a person managing a difficult person, just direct and true. I need 2 minutes first. She breathed in, breathed out. Rudy, she said, where is he? Running. He knows we know about him. Griff held her gaze. He's not coming back to the house. I want to be honest with you about why. She waited. What Rudy was doing, what he's involved in, it's bigger than what you knew about. What happened in your house was part of something larger. He paused. Your children were not hurt beyond what you know about, but they were in a situation that was intended to get worse. He was working up to something. The color in her face changed. Working up to, yes. The silence that followed was not the silence of not understanding. It was the silence of understanding arriving all at once, the way bad news arrives when you've been given exactly the right words for it. He watched her process it, watched the sequence of it move through her face, comprehension, horror, the specific horror of retrospect, of adding up the months and arriving at the number. I didn't know, she said. Her voice had changed. I knew something was wrong. I knew it, but I couldn't think straight. You were being medicated without your knowledge, Griff said. What you couldn't do wasn't a failure. It was chemistry. He said this flatly, without softness and without hardness, just as fact. You don't need to apologize to me for it. She looked at him for a long moment. Why are you helping? She said. You don't know us. Your daughter walked 1.5 miles in a broken boot in the cold to ask someone to help her brother. He let that sit for a moment. That's enough for me. Diane's eyes went to the door, to the hallway where Nora was sitting with her back against the wall and her father's watch in her hands. She's so much like him, she said. Not to Griff. To herself or to something before him. Her father. She makes decisions and she commits to them. He was like that. She pressed her hands harder between her knees. I never was. I always waited for someone else to... She stopped. You're here, Griff said. She looked at him. That's a start, he said. He stood up. Come see your kids. She came. The afternoon moved slowly, the way afternoons moved in places where people were waiting for things they couldn't control. Caleb fell asleep again after lunch, his body doing what 5-year-old bodies did when they'd been through what his had been through, retreating into rest, using it like a resource, which it was. Diane sat beside him on the cot, with her hand on his back and her jaw set and her eyes doing something difficult and private. Nora sat in the chair in the corner of the room, watching her mother, and Griff stood in the doorway for a moment before turning away because some things were not his to watch. In the main room, Priest had set up a proper workspace. Laptop, external drive, the legal pad covered in its network diagram, 2 phones. He was on one of them when Griff came in, talking in the low economical sentences of someone conveying information with maximum density and minimum exposure. He looked up and held up 3 fingers. Griff nodded. He understood. 3 minutes. Mara was at the bar with a coffee she wasn't drinking, looking at the cork board that Priest had put up on the wall to replace the pool schedule. The photographs, the string, the names. Pinole County site, she said when she heard Griff behind her. Delgado says it's a residential property. 3-bedroom. Registered to a property management company that doesn't have a functional address. Who's on site? Unknown. Could be vacant. Could be occupied. She turned. Could be children. Griff looked at the board. Valley site, he said. Warehouse adjacent, some kind of small, light industrial unit. Carver used it for storage before. Delgado thinks he's using it as a transit point now. She paused. Which means things are moving through it, not just sitting. When? Delgado doesn't know exactly, but transit points don't sit idle. Whatever's using it is using it regularly. Her voice stayed flat, stayed controlled. We need to move on both sites before Carver burns them. Both sites mean splitting. I know what it means. Griff looked at her. You take the valley. I want Pinole. I know, you're taking the valley. He held her gaze. Because the valley is the moving one. The one where we don't know what we're walking into. And I need you somewhere I know you'll adapt if it goes wrong. She looked back at him for a moment. Something moved in her face. Not agreement, exactly. More like the acknowledgement that the argument was sound and she wasn't going to fight something sound just because she didn't like it. Fine, she said. But I need Reyes and Huck. Done! Priest came off the phone. That was my contact with Maricopa County Sheriff's Office. He set the phone down and looked at the corkboard and then at Griff and Mara. They've got a BOLO out on Holt. He's on their radar for the domestic charges, the ones that were filed, not the ones that weren't. They pick him up, they'll hold him on those. He paused. If we feed them what we have, the phones, the network diagram, what Delgado's got, they'll have enough to hold him indefinitely. Not yet, Griff said. Priest waited. If Holt gets picked up now, Carver burns the sites. He has a system. If Holt goes dark for more than 12 hours, there's a protocol. He looked at the board. We need the sites first, then Holt, then we hand everything to your contact. Priest considered this. That's a tight window. 12 hours. From when? From whenever Carver figures out Holt is in custody, which means we need to move on both sites before Holt gets picked up. Griff looked at the clock on the wall. Which means tonight. The room was quiet. Both sites in one night, Mara said. Both sites in one night, Griff confirmed. She looked at the board again, at the string, at the names. I need to make calls, she said. So do I. She moved. He moved. Outside, the afternoon light was going flat and thin, the sun dropping behind the western mountains without ceremony, the desert floor going from pale gold to gray in the space of 20 minutes. The bikers in the parking lot were doing the thing they did before operations. Nothing dramatic, nothing visible to anyone passing. Checking tires, checking fuel. The small, deliberate preparations of people who had been through enough hard nights to understand that the quality of the ordinary preceding moments had direct bearing on what happened in the moments that mattered. Trace was at his bike when Griff came out. He looked up. Tonight, Griff said. Trace nodded. No questions. Griff went back inside. He went to the back hallway. Nora was no longer in the doorway of the room where Diane and Caleb were. She was back in her spot on the floor, back against the wall, but she wasn't looking at the watch anymore. She was looking at the door to the main room, which told him she'd been listening to what she could hear through it. She looked up at him when he appeared. Tonight, she said. Not a question. Yes. She processed this. The places you found. On the map. Yes. She looked down at Bishop, who was in her lap. Are there other kids? She said. Her voice was absolutely steady, which was the thing about Nora Ellison that Griff would carry for the rest of his life. Not her bravery, which was real, but the specific quality of her steadiness. The way she held herself still against the weight of terrible things and asked the right questions anyway. He looked at her for a long moment. We don't know yet, he said. That's what we're going to find out. She nodded. Okay, she said. Then, be careful. The simplicity of it. The total uncalculated simplicity of a child saying be careful to a man she'd known for less than 18 hours as he prepared to ride into something dangerous, moved through him like the cold outside. Not shattering, just thorough. All the way through. Always, he said. He went to get ready. They left at 9:30. Two groups, two directions. The club split down a fault line that felt temporary, but wasn't. Mara's group heading southwest toward the valley, Griff's heading southeast toward Pinole County, and between them 70 miles of Arizona night and two sites that might be empty or might not be, and a man named Carver moving through the dark in a truck with a cracked dashboard who was already 2 moves ahead of where they'd been this morning. The Harleys sounded different at night. In the daytime, the sound was presence, visible, declarative, the statement of a thing taking up space. At night, it became something else, contextual. The sound of motion through darkness, the sound of intent moving faster than visibility, the sound of people heading somewhere with a direction that had been decided and was not being reconsidered. Griff rode point. Priest was behind him, then Trace, then Doyle and 2 others whose names I'll give you in a moment because they matter. The road east was quiet. A few cars moving the opposite direction, their headlights arcing through the dark and disappearing. The temperature had dropped further. Griff could feel it in his hands even through the gloves, in the specific way cold air found the gaps between textile layers and the skin beneath and stayed there. He'd ridden in worse. He'd ridden in much worse. The cold was just weather. The cold was just context. He thought about the Pinole County site. 3-bedroom house, residential, registered to a shell company. Could be empty. Carver clearing out ahead of exposure. could be occupied, which meant something between one set of circumstances and another, and he didn't let himself fully construct either one, because constructing them in advance was a way of deciding what you'd find before you found it. And deciding in advance was the thing that had gotten men killed in other contexts, other situations, other hard nights in other places. He thought about Mara. She'd looked at him before she left. One of those looks, the short grammar of it. He'd looked back. That was the whole conversation. That was enough. They'd been doing this long enough. Doing this, the thing they did that wasn't a partnership exactly, but was more than a working relationship, was the specific bond that forms between two people who've seen each other through things that other people don't see, long enough that the full sentence rarely needed to happen. She knew what he'd been thinking. He knew what she'd been thinking. They'd agreed on it the way you agree on something you don't say out loud, because saying it out loud would make it a negotiation, and it wasn't a negotiation. He pressed the throttle and the bike opened up. The desert moved past him in the dark. The house in Pinal County was on a dirt road 3/4 of a mile off the main county road, behind a stand of saguaro and scrub that concealed it effectively from anything not looking specifically. The address Delgado had given them was precise. Priest had verified it against satellite imagery on the drive, calling out landmarks through the earpiece, and they found the turnoff exactly where it was supposed to be. A gap in the scrub, a pair of tire tracks worn into the caliche, no mailbox, no marker. Griff cut his engine half a mile back. The others followed within seconds, the silence arriving all at once like something they'd agreed on without words. They walked the bikes to the brush line and left them there and moved on foot the last 400 yards. The house had lights on. 2 windows, ground floor, the amber warmth of interior lighting showing through curtains that weren't fully drawn. One vehicle in what served as a driveway, a dark-colored sedan, late model, plates Priest photographed from 30 yards with a phone camera. The house itself was ordinary, so siding, flat roof, a rusted metal storage unit against the near wall, dead oleander along the foundation. The kind of ordinary that was constructed, the kind of ordinary that was a decision. They stopped in the brush line. Griff looked at the windows, looked at the vehicle, looked at the storage unit. Trace moved up beside him. Vehicles registered to a deceased individual. Priest said quietly into Griff's ear from 8 feet back, phone in hand. Died 11 months ago. Title was never transferred. He paused. Carver. Griff looked at the house for a long moment. Something was wrong with the silence inside it. He'd been in enough situations to know what occupied silence sounded like versus unoccupied silence. Occupied silence had a texture, breath, movement, the specific quality of space with people in it making no noise because they were trying to make no noise. The house had that texture, not one person. More. He made a hand signal. Trace and Doyle split left, the other 2 went right. Griff and Priest went straight. They moved. The front door was unlocked, which was either an oversight or a deliberate choice, and Griff pressed through it with Priest behind him and the warmth of the interior hitting his face after the cold outside. And then he was in a hallway, and the hallway was ordinary. Coat hooks, a rug, a closed door on the left, an open doorway to the right showing a kitchen, the amber light from the ground floor windows coming from behind the closed door. He heard breathing. Not one breath. Multiple. Small. He put his hand on the door. He opened it. What he found in that room required him, for the second time in 2 days, to hold himself completely still against something that wanted to break through. He stood in the doorway, and he looked at what was there, and he breathed through it. 1 breath, 2 breaths, steady and deliberate, and behind him he heard Priest make a sound that was very small and immediately suppressed. 3 children. Sitting on a bare mattress against the far wall, close together, not moving, watching him with the expression of children who had learned not to react to people entering rooms. The oldest was perhaps 9. The youngest could not have been more than 4. They were dressed. They were not obviously harmed. They were just there, just sitting, just watching, just holding each other the way you held the person next to you when you'd been somewhere frightening for long enough that contact was the only reliable thing. For a moment the room was completely silent. Then Griff did something that Priest, in the years after, would describe as the most important thing he ever saw the man do. He stepped inside the room and he lowered himself to one knee on the floor, slowly, telegraphing every movement, making himself smaller than the doorway, smaller than the room, and he said very quietly, "Hey, we're going to get you out of here, okay? You can trust that. We're going to get you out." The youngest child, the 4-year-old, a girl, dark-haired, looked at him for a moment. Then she held out her arms. He crossed the room and he picked her up. She weighed almost nothing. She tucked her face against his shoulder and held on with both hands, and he stood up with her and he felt, in the place behind his eyes where the river water went dark, something shift. Not heal, nothing healed that cleanly, but shift. The way weight redistributes when you've been carrying it wrong for a long time and someone adjusts the load. Trace appeared in the doorway. Griff looked at him. "Call Delgado. Tell him we need people here now. Children, 3, no obvious injuries." He paused. "Tell him we also need his Maricopa contact." Trace was already on the phone. Griff looked at the other 2 children still on the mattress. Doyle had come in behind Trace and crouched down beside them, talking quietly, that low, careful quality of a large man making himself unthreatening. And the older one was listening with the guarded attention of a child who'd learned to evaluate before trusting. "Who else is in the house?" Griff said to the older child. The child looked at him. "The man," the child said. "He left when he heard the bikes." Griff looked at Priest. Priest was already moving toward the back of the house. He came back 90 seconds later. "Back door's open," he said. He went through the yard. "There's a gate in the back fence." He paused. "And there's a phone on the kitchen counter. He left it." Griff looked at the phone. He thought about what Carver leaving a phone behind meant. He thought about the Valley site, about Mara. "The phone is clean," Priest said, reading the look. "Burner. But the last outgoing call." He held up his own phone, showing the screen. "It went out 9 minutes ago, before we got inside." 9 minutes. "The Valley site," Griff said. "Yes." He already had his phone out, calling Mara. The line rang twice. 3 times. 4. On the 5th ring, she picked up. Her voice was 3 syllables, clipped, the specific compression of someone who was in the middle of something and couldn't talk long. "Already know, we're—" A sound behind her that wasn't right. Then the line went dead. Griff looked at the phone in his hand. The girl on his shoulder had both hands in the collar of his jacket, and her face still pressed against it, and he could feel her small weight and her breathing and the specific fragility of something that had no idea how close it was to worse. He looked at Priest. Priest looked back. "She's in trouble," Griff said. Not a question. Not a fear. A fact, stated plainly, the way facts got stated when there wasn't time for anything else. He handed the girl to Doyle, carefully, gently, a deliberate and unhurried transfer despite everything. And he was out the back door and into the cold Arizona night, running toward the bikes, and Priest was right behind him. And behind them the house held 3 children and 2 bikers, and a phone that had made one call 9 minutes ago that had given away the thing that mattered most. That Carver had known they were coming. That Carver had made a call of his own. That Mara and Reyes and Huck had ridden directly into. The Valley site was a converted light industrial unit at the end of a service road that dead-ended against a concrete drainage channel, and it had been burning for 4 minutes by the time Griff got the second call. Not Mara's phone. Reyes. "We're out," Reyes said. His voice had the compressed, deliberate quality of a man running while talking. "Mara's down. Not... She's moving. It's her shoulder. We got out, but the building..." A sound behind him, structural, the specific sound of something collapsing inward. "They torched it before we got inside. Carver's people. There were 3 of them." Griff was already on the bike, Priest behind him. "Where are they now?" "Gone. Vehicles. We couldn't follow." Reyes breathed. "Griff, there was a room in the back. We got in before the fire hit it." A pause, longer than the situation required. There were records, documents. I got some out. Not all. Most of it's gone." "How bad is Mara?" "She's standing. She's arguing with me about whether she needs the hospital." A sound that might have been Mara's voice in the background, clipped and annoyed. So Probably fine, but her shoulder took something. A door, I think. When the roof section came, get her to Birch. Don't go to a hospital yet. Birch first. Griff was moving now. Priest keeping pace. Keep the documents dry. He ended the call. He rode. The drive to the valley site took 28 minutes at the speed he was going, which was not a legal speed on any road in Arizona. But the highway was empty and the cold air was a physical fact he was moving through rather than something he was experiencing. And the distance closed the way distances close at night when you're riding towards something that's already over, and you know it, and you go anyway. The fire had been mostly contained by the time he arrived, not by the fire department, which hadn't been called, but by the drainage channel on 3 sides and the concrete pad of the lot on the 4th. The unit itself was gutted. The shell stood. The interior was black and still smoking in the cold air, the smell of it reaching him 100 yards out, acrid and chemical under the cleaner smell of ash, which meant synthetic materials, treated materials, the specific smell of things that had been stored and were now destroyed. Mara was sitting on the step of the drainage channel with Huck beside her and a flashlight aimed at her left shoulder. She was not having the argument with Reyes anymore. She was looking at the ruined building with an expression that was very controlled and very specific. Griff parked, walked to her. She looked up at him. Her shoulder was wrong. Not catastrophically, not broken, but the angle was off and there was a bruise spreading from the clavicle down toward the joint that would be serious tomorrow. "The records," she said. "I know. Most of it's gone." Her voice didn't crack. Nothing in her cracked. Reyes got maybe 20 pages out, physical documents, photographs. She paused. "Griff, the photographs." He waited. "They weren't all from here. The operation. It's not just Carver." She held his gaze. "The documents had other names, other locations, other—" She stopped for a moment, pressed her jaw together, started again. "This is national, not regional. What we've been calling Carver's network, Carver isn't the top of it. He's a tier. There are 2 tiers above him." She reached into her jacket with her good arm and pulled out a plastic bag, a Ziploc taken from somewhere in the industrial unit's remaining material, with folded pages inside. "I grabbed what I could." He took the bag, looked at the pages through the plastic without opening it. Photographs, text, what appeared to be financial records, a map with locations marked in red. "How many tiers?" he said. "The documents suggest at least 3, maybe 4. She held his gaze. "And one of the names at the top tier—" She stopped again. This time the stopping was different, more deliberate. "Griff, one of the names is someone we've heard before." He looked at her. "Delgado found it in his research. He mentioned it 6 months ago. Different case, different state. We didn't follow up because it wasn't connected to anything we were working." She pressed her lips together. "It's connected now." "Who?" She told him. He stood completely still for 3 full seconds. Then he turned and looked at the burning building, and he breathed in through his nose and out through his mouth, slowly, the specific breathing of a person processing information that requires processing. And he looked at the sky, which was clear and cold and full of stars that had nothing to say about any of this, and he looked back at Mara. "How certain?" "The name is on 2 separate documents, different dates, different transactions." She held his gaze. "Certain enough." Priest was behind him. Griff turned to look at him. Priest's face said he'd heard. "If this gets out before we have everything," Priest said quietly, "it doesn't go to a county sheriff's contact. It goes somewhere that can hold it." He paused. "And somewhere that won't bury it." "I know where it goes," Griff said. He looked at the burning building one more time. "Get Mara to Birch," he said, "and get me everything in that bag on a table. Tonight." They drove back to Dura Flats in a silence that had different qualities in different vehicles. Mara in Huck's truck, her shoulder braced against the door, watching the road. Reyes on his bike with the plastic bag strapped to his chest under his jacket. Priest behind Griff, both of them moving at the same speed, maintaining the same formation as before, the habit persisting even though the purpose of it had changed. They weren't moving towards something now. They were moving back, which was a different operation entirely, and harder in its own specific way. Griff thought about the name Mara had told him. He thought about it the way you thought about information that restructured everything around it, not analyzing it, not strategizing yet, just letting it exist in the space behind his eyes and feeling the full weight of what it changed. Because it changed a great deal. It changed specifically who could be trusted with what they had and when, and it changed the shape of the next 24 hours from something manageable into something that required a different kind of planning than they'd been doing. It also changed something personal, something he'd been carrying since Kandahar, since the valley east of Kandahar, since the thing in the Phoenix parking garage that was in no official record anywhere. He'd been carrying it as a question, a gap in the accounting, a thing that had never fully made sense no matter how many times he'd turned it over. The name Mara had told him didn't answer the question, but it located it. It put the gap on a map. It said, "The thing you could never explain happened because of this, and this has been here all along." That was almost worse than not knowing. Almost. He rode. Chug. Birch did what Birch did to Mara's shoulder, which involved manipulation that made Mara go white for approximately 4 seconds, and then breathed deliberately through her nose for another 30, and declared it dislocated and relocated, not broken, bruised badly, but functional. She strapped it with an ace bandage and athletic tape, and gave Mara 2 over-the-counter painkillers and 1 prescription anti-inflammatory that she produced from a locked cabinet under the back room's small sink, and didn't explain the provenance of, because Birch's provenance explanations were never comprehensive. "You'll be stiff tomorrow," Birch said. "I'll be fine tomorrow," Mara said. "Those are different statements." "I'm aware." Birch looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone who had made the professional assessment and was now making a separate personal one. "You went in knowing the building might be compromised." Mara held her gaze. "We didn't have confirmation it was compromised until the fire started." "That's not what I said." A silence. "We needed what was inside," Mara said. "Reyes was with me. We were careful." Careful people still get their shoulders dislocated. "Birch." Mara's voice was flat, precise. "I know what I did. I know what it cost. I'm not arguing with you about whether it was worth it." She looked at the door. "It was worth it." Birch said nothing. She capped the tape and stood up and moved to the sink, and her back said everything her mouth hadn't. In the main room, Griff had the documents out on the table. 22 pages total, some full, some partial, some damaged at the edges by smoke or heat. Priest was photographing each one with his phone before touching them, working methodically from left to right. Reyes stood back against the wall with his arms crossed, and a cup of coffee that had gone cold, and an expression that was the expression of a man who'd carried something heavy, and set it down and wasn't sure yet how to stand without it. Griff read. He read carefully, the way he read everything. Not fast, not performing speed, but absorbing, cross-referencing, building the picture from its components. The financial records first, because financial records were architecture. They showed you the skeleton of a thing, the load-bearing structure. Then the correspondence, which was in a code that wasn't sophisticated but required some interpretation, which Priest provided in a low-running commentary as he photographed. Then the photographs. The photographs were the hardest. He didn't look at them long. He looked at them long enough to understand what they were, and to file that understanding in the place where he filed things that required a specific response. Not rage, because rage was noise, because rage was the thing that made you move wrong at the worst moments, but something colder and more directional. Purpose refined to its most specific form. The point on a compass, not the general heading. He turned the last photograph face down. "The name," Priest said. He wasn't asking. He'd seen the name in the documents. He was giving Griff the opportunity to confirm it out loud, to make it a shared fact rather than a private one. Griff confirmed it. Priest was quiet for a moment. "He's been in that position for 11 years, Priest said. "I know." "Which means the case 6 months ago, the one in Utah, he buried it, yes." Griff looked at the table, at the 22 pages. "He buried it from inside the office that was supposed to be investigating it." Another silence. "We can't go to Delgado with this," Priest said. "Not because Delgado isn't trustworthy. Because Delgado's contact, the Maricopa contact, goes through channels that this person has access to." "I know." We need to go further up and further outside at the same time, federal level, but not through any channel that routes through Arizona. Priest paused. I have a contact at the Bureau. Not Arizona field office. D.C. She's solid. She has no connection to this man's jurisdiction. Can you reach her tonight? I can try. It's late. Try. Priest picked up his phone. Griff looked at the documents and thought about the name, and thought about the valley east of Kandahar, and thought about the way certain events in a life, events that seemed at the time to be isolated, local, their own contained misfortune, revealed themselves later as nodes in a larger structure, revealed themselves as things that had been done to you rather than things that had simply happened. The distinction between those two categories was significant. It changed what you owed, and to whom, and what form payment could legitimately take. The door to the back hallway opened. Nora stood in it. She was in the oversized camp shoes and the wool socks and the same jacket she'd worn when she arrived, and her hair was loose around her face, and she had Bishop under her arm and her father's watch in her hand. She looked at the table, at the documents, at Griff's face. You found something bigger, she said. Not a question. Yes, he said. She came to the table. He didn't stop her, both because stopping her would have been wrong and because she was already looking at the documents with an expression that was utterly without flinching. And he'd learned in the last 24 hours that you didn't manage Nora Ellison's exposure to reality. She managed it herself. And she managed it better than most adults he knew. She looked at the financial records. She looked at the correspondence. She didn't look at the photographs because Griff had put them face down and he moved his hand to keep them that way. And she looked at his hand and understood and didn't push. The man who was with Rudy, she said. Carver. Yes. He's not the top. No. She looked at the table for a moment. Then she looked up at him. The person above him, she said. Are they someone who's supposed to protect kids? He held her gaze. Yes, he said. She took that in. Took it in fully, the way she took everything in. Not collapsing under it, not performing stoicism, just receiving it and holding it and staying upright beneath it. Okay, she said. Nora, I said okay. She was quiet for a moment. It means you have to be more careful. It means you can't trust the same people you thought you could trust. She looked at Bishop's remaining eye. My dad told me that once. He said the hardest thing about the world is that the people who are supposed to protect you sometimes can't, and sometimes they're the problem. She was quiet. He said when that happens, you don't give up. You just find the other protectors, the ones who aren't supposed to but do anyway. She looked at Griff. You're those. He didn't say anything for a moment. Go back to sleep, he said. His voice was quiet. I wasn't asleep. I know. He looked at her. Nora, whatever happens next, your job is to keep yourself and Caleb steady. That's it. That's the whole job. Can you do that? Yes, she said, without hesitation, without performance. Just yes. Okay? She went back down the hallway. Priest lowered the phone. She answered, he said. My contact, she's listening. Griff went to the table, weak. The rest of that night moved in the concentrated way that serious nights move. Not fast exactly, but without any wasted space. Every hour had the density of several. Priest and his contact spent 40 minutes on the phone in 2 separate calls, the second one longer than the first, with Priest reading names and locations from the documents and the contact making sounds that were not reassuring sounds, that were the sounds of a person absorbing information that confirmed what she'd suspected but hoped she was wrong about. She would need time. She would need to pull records, verify, build the kind of case that didn't get thrown out and didn't get buried by the person it was about. She needed everything they had. They photographed every document, sent the photographs through an encrypted channel Priest established in the back room, the actual physical pages stored in a metal box under the sink beside Birch's locked cabinet. The photographs were not sent. Those stayed on Griff's phone only, in a folder that was backed up to a cloud address only he had the password for. Those weren't for the Bureau contact, not yet. Those were insurance. Mara came out of the back room at 1 in the morning with her shoulder strapped and her face still pale, but her eyes fully operational. She looked at the table, at what remained of the documents. "How far up?" she said. Priest told her. She was quiet for a long moment. "And Carver," she said. "Current location." "Still unknown. He's moving." Priest turned the laptop toward her. Satellite map, red markers, a projected movement pattern based on the road network between the Valley site and the known associates' addresses. "He knows we found the Penal site. He'll know the Valley site's burned. He's going to ground." "Going to ground doesn't mean going far," Mara said. She studied the map. "He's not from here. He's using the state as a board, moving pieces, not familiar with the terrain the way we're familiar with it." She put her finger on the map at a cluster of red markers in the northeast quadrant. "These 3 locations are all within 40 miles of each other. If he's going to ground, he goes somewhere he has infrastructure, something already established. We don't have addresses for those." "No." She looked at Griff. "But we have Holt." The room went still. "Holt's been running with Carver for 2 years," she said. "He knows the infrastructure. He knows where Carver goes when he needs to disappear." Her voice was level, operational. "If the Maricopa Bolo picks him up tonight, if Holt gets picked up through the Bolo, it goes through Maricopa channels," Priest said, "which this person has access to. Then we find Holt before Maricopa does." She looked at Griff. "We find him, we talk to him, and we get the addresses before Carver has time to burn them too." Griff looked at the map. He thought about Holt. Thought about the man who had lived in Nora's house, eaten food purchased with her mother's money, broken her brother's ribs, controlled her mother's mind with prescription medication dosed into her morning coffee. He thought about the drawer with Holt's other phones in it, the ones a county worker had written down and not followed up on. He thought about the 2 prior domestic charges that had pled down, and the third one that had never made it to filing, and the earlier case, 5 years ago, in another county, with another woman and a child. He thought about what talking to Rudy Holt would require. He thought about the line between that and the other thing. The thing he wasn't going to do. The thing that would make him into something different from what he was. The thing that would take everything Nora had brought to his door and turn it into something that couldn't be given back. "We find him," Griff said. "We talk to him, and then he goes to the right people with what he knows." He held Mara's gaze. "That's the sequence. That's all of it." She held his gaze. "I know," she said. "Say it." "We find him, we talk to him, we hand him over." "Yes, I know." He nodded. "Where does he run when he runs?" he said, not to Mara but to the room, to anyone with an answer. Trace's voice came from the corner, where he'd been sitting so quietly Griff had half forgotten he was there. "I know someone who used to run with Holt's people," Trace said. "Not Carver, earlier. Before Carver. Same area of operation, different crew." He stood up. "Guy named Stell. He's out now. Got out 3 years ago, got straight, runs a welding shop in Casa Grande. He'd know where Holt went when he needed to disappear." "Will he talk?" Trace was quiet for a moment. "I've got something on him that he'd rather I didn't say out loud." He said it without pride, without threat, just factually. "He'll talk. Casa Grande is 40 minutes. I know." Griff looked at the clock, 2 in the morning. "Go," he said. Trace went. While Trace drove to Casa Grande, Griff went to the back hallway. Not to Nora's room. To the room at the end, the one with the cot where Diane Ellison had been sleeping, or trying to sleep since Birch had given her something mild to help with the medication withdrawal. The door was slightly open. He knocked. "Yeah," Diane said. He went in. She was sitting up on the cot, not sleeping, with the blanket around her shoulders and her hands in her lap. She looked better than she had in the afternoon, more present, more of the real person in her face, the chemical fog thinning. She looked at him when he came in with the direct look of someone who'd been thinking hard and hadn't stopped. "How bad is it?" she said. He sat in the chair. "Bad." "Tell me." He told her. Not everything. Not the photographs, not the specific documents, but the shape of it. The network. Carver. The name above Carver. The Burning Valley site. The 3 children from the Pinal County house. He told her flatly and completely, the way he'd tell another adult, because she was another adult and had been treated as less than one for long enough. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time. "The man above Carver," she said. "Is he the reason the county worker didn't follow up?" "We think so. The channel runs through his jurisdiction." She nodded. One nod, absorbing it. "I reported Rudy twice," she said, "to the county line. Both times someone called back and said they'd sent a check request. Both times, nothing happened." She looked at the blanket. I thought I wasn't saying the right things, or they didn't believe me, or I was too..." She paused. "He'd been adjusting my medication for 2 months by that point. I thought my own perception was wrong." "It wasn't." "I know that now, but then..." She shook her head. "I couldn't trust what I was seeing. That was the point of it. That was what he was doing." Griff said nothing. There was nothing to say to that, not because there wasn't a response, but because some things needed to be said into silence, needed to land somewhere without being caught and softened. "Nora," Diane said. "She's okay. She's awake. She heard things tonight." "Some things." Diane pressed her lips together. "She's been protecting Caleb and protecting me for 11 months since her father died." She looked up. "I knew she was. I watched her do it, and I couldn't make myself do it with her. I couldn't make myself..." Her voice caught once. She controlled it. "A mother who can't protect her own children." "A mother who was being deliberately incapacitated," Griff said. It's not an excuse," he said. "It's a fact, and facts matter when you're deciding what you owe yourself going forward." He held her gaze. "You've got 2 kids who need their mother back. Not perfect, not repaired, just back." He paused. "That's the whole job from here." She looked at him for a long moment. "You keep saying that," she said. "The whole job. Like you're trying to tell people what their job is." "I am," he said, "because most people don't know, and then they try to do every job at once and they can't do any of them." She was quiet. "What's your job?" she said. He looked at the floor for a moment. "Right now," he said, "my job is to find a man who ran into the desert and get him to tell me where his employer goes to hide, and then make sure that what we have is too big for anyone to bury." He paused. "And not lose anyone in the process." Mara's shoulder. "Yes." "Is she..." "She's fine. She'll be fine." Diane nodded. She looked at the door. "Tell Nora I'm here. She checks the door every hour." She said it with the specific mix of guilt and love that belongs to the relationship between a parent who has been failing and the child who has been compensating. "I know she's been doing that. I want her to know she can stop." "I'll tell her," Griff said. He stood up. She reached out and put her hand on his arm, not grasping, just touching briefly. "Thank you," she said. "Not just for tonight, for..." She stopped. "For moving. When she came here, for not looking at an 8-year-old girl and deciding she was someone else's problem." He looked at her hand on his arm, then at her face. "She's hard to ignore," he said. He went out. Trace called at 3:40 in the morning. Stell had talked. Stell had talked quickly and with a comprehensive quality that suggested he'd been waiting for an opportunity to put distance between himself and Holt's world for years, and had simply needed the correct pressure applied to a specific point. 3 locations. Not the ones on Mara's projected movement map. Different ones, closer to the mountains, a triangle of spots Holt used when he needed to wait out a problem. A storage yard off Route 79, an empty seasonal property in the Pinal Mountains, a diner, not for shelter, but for phone signal, reliable and unjammed, a place Holt had used to make contact when he couldn't risk anything traceable. The diner was open 24 hours. Trace was 17 minutes away. Griff was already moving when Priest called from the back room, his bureau contact again on the second call, with something to report. "She found the Utah case," Priest said. "The buried case. She found the burial mechanism. Griff, it's documented. She says this is enough. Not everything, but enough to open a federal investigation that operates outside this man's jurisdiction. He paused. But she needs the original documents, not photographs. The originals. Griff thought about the metal box under the sink. How long? She can be in Tucson by tomorrow night. She'll bring an evidence team. Minimal. 2 people, not a full response, nothing that broadcasts. He paused. She says to tell you she understands what you're risking and she won't let it disappear. Get me her exact words on that, Griff said. Priest relayed them. 3 sentences, specific and unambiguous, the language of someone who understood what a promise meant in this context. Griff said, "Tell her tomorrow night, Tucson. We'll be there." He went outside. The cold hit him the same way it always did. Not a surprise, just a fact. The desert night in December, doing what it did without apology. He stood in the parking lot and looked at the sky and thought about 17 minutes and a diner on a highway and a man who had carried his employer's instructions into a house with 2 children in it. He thought about Nora's sleeve riding up in the cold. He thought about Caleb's ribs. He thought about the 4-year-old girl who'd held out her arms in a house in Pinal County and tucked her face against his shoulder and held on with both hands. He pulled on his gloves. He went back inside and told Mara. She was already standing. Her jacket was already on. "I'm coming," she said. "Your shoulder. I'm coming." She said it with a particular quality of finality that had nothing to do with argument. "Don't make it something it isn't. I'm coming because this is mine too." She held his gaze. "You know what I mean." He did know. He knew exactly what she meant, and he knew it didn't refer to the operation. It referred to the thing the operation had turned into. The specific history that had made this personal for her in a way that was private and not up for discussion, and that he'd never asked about because he'd never needed to. He'd seen it in her face in the Pinal County house. He'd seen it in the way she'd grabbed those documents out of a burning building. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she said. The diner sat at the junction of Route 79 and a county road that didn't have a name on the map, just a number. And it glowed in the 4 a.m. dark, the way certain places glowed in the Arizona desert at that hour. Not welcoming exactly, not warm exactly, but present. A point of light in a lot of dark. The parking lot held 4 vehicles. One of them was the truck with the cracked dashboard. Griff pulled in without cutting his engine. The truck was empty. He parked. He and Mara went in through the front door, and the warmth and the fluorescent light and the smell of coffee and synthetic maple syrup hit him at the same time, and he scanned the room in the specific way he'd been scanning rooms since before Arizona, since before any of this. Booths along the window, 4 occupied, a pair of truckers, an elderly couple, a man alone with a newspaper, and at the booth in the far back corner, facing the door the way a man faced a door when he was watching for what came through it, Rudy Holt. He'd cut his hair since the photograph Priest had shown them. He was thinner. He had the look of someone who'd been moving without sleeping for 20 hours. Tight around the eyes, slow in the hands, the specific deterioration of a man whose plan had not been to be in this diner at this hour, but whose options had narrowed to this. He saw Griff. He didn't run. Maybe he'd calculated the math and understood running was done. Maybe he was just too tired. He looked at Griff coming across the diner with Mara behind him, and he put both hands flat on the table, visible, palms down, and he watched them come. Griff slid into the booth across from him. Mara stood at the end of the table, one hand resting on the surface, her strapped shoulder angled back. Nobody spoke for a moment. The waitress appeared and Griff looked at her and said, "Coffee, please." And she went away. And in the silence that followed, he looked at Holt directly, and Holt looked back, and the booth held between them. Everything that had happened in a house on Coyote Lane, and everything that had happened since, and the weight of it was considerable. "You're not police," Holt said. "No." "But you found me." "Yes." Holt looked at the table. "What do you want?" 3 addresses, Griff said. Carver's current location, whatever else you have on the network's top tier, and everything you have on how the county reports were being intercepted. He paused. In exchange, you go to the right people with that information, and they file it correctly, and you end up in a cell instead of in the desert. Holt was quiet. "The cell is the better option," Griff said. He said it without threat, just as information. You don't know what Carver does to people who talk. I know what happens to people who don't, Griff said. I saw the room in the Pinal County house. Something moved in Holt's face. Not guilt exactly. Guilt required a more intact conscience than Holt appeared to be working with at this point. Something more primitive. Something closer to a man looking at the full shape of what he'd been part of for the first time without the architecture of justification around it. He looked at the table. There's something you don't know, he said. Griff waited. About your club, Holt said. About why Carver sent me to Duraflat specifically. He looked up. It wasn't random. He didn't put me in that house because the house was available. He put me in that house because of you, because of the iron verdict. The diner was very quiet. What are you talking about? Mara said. Holt looked at her, then back at Griff. There's a man in your club, he said. Someone who's been feeding information to Carver's network for 14 months. Movement information, when you ride, where you go, which routes you use. He paused. Carver knew you were coming to both sites tonight because someone in your club told him you were coming. He let that sit for a moment. That's why the Valley site was burning when your people got there. That's why there were people waiting. The word waiting arrived with a specific weight. Mara's hand on the table had gone very still. Griff looked at Holt. His face was completely controlled. His hands were flat on the table, not gripping, not white at the knuckles, just there. He breathed once. Who? He said. Holt looked at him. I don't know the name, he said. I only know the handle. What Carver called him. He paused. And what Carver paid him. Tell me. Holt told him. And what Griff heard in that booth, under fluorescent light at 4 a.m. with cold coffee and the distant sound of a truck on the highway outside, was not the handle. The handle meant nothing to him. What he heard was the payment amount, and the payment date, and the description Holt gave of the contact method. A very specific contact method, a very specific sequence of events, a very specific set of details that could only be known by someone who had been in one specific room on one specific night, and Griff knew which room, and he knew which night, and he knew who had been in it. He sat in the booth for a long moment. Then he stood up. Mara was watching him. She'd seen something in his face, not the controlled surface, but the thing beneath it, the river water going dark. And her expression asked the question without asking it. He shook his head once. Not now. He looked at Holt. You're going to write down everything you just told me, he said, and then you're going to get in the truck and follow us. And when we get back to Duraflats, you're going to tell it to the people I tell you to tell it to. And if you run before that, or if any part of what you've said is constructed, he stopped. You know I'll find you again. I know, Holt said. Write it down. The waitress brought coffee. Holt asked for a pen. She brought one without curiosity, the way diner waitresses at 4 a.m. accepted the various configurations of humanity that sat in their booths without requiring narrative context. Holt wrote. Griff drank his coffee and looked out the window at the dark and the empty highway and the cold Arizona morning that was still an hour from beginning, and he thought about the name behind the handle, and he thought about 14 months of movement information, and he thought about the Valley site burning and Mara's shoulder and the room in the Pinal County house, and he thought about what he was going to do when he walked back through the door of the iron verdict and looked at the man who had done. They rode back to Duraflats with Holt's truck behind them, and Griff didn't speak on the radio the entire way. Mara rode beside him, closer than formation required, and twice she looked at his profile in the dark and read what was there and said nothing. She understood the silence. She understood what was underneath it. She'd been doing the same math since the diner booth, working backward through 14 months of operations, checking every moved piece against the new information, finding the places where things had gone wrong in ways that now had explanation, and the explanation was worse than incompetence or bad luck had been. Bad luck didn't have a name. This did. The clubhouse was lit when they pulled in. Main room, back room, the string of orange and red lights along the roof line going through their slow pulse in the pre-dawn dark. 5 bikes in the lot. All 5 belonging to men who were inside, who'd been there through the night, who'd waited while Griff and Mara ran down a diner on Route 79 and came back with a man in a truck and a piece of information that was going to break something that couldn't be put back together the way it was before. Griff cut his engine. He sat on the bike for exactly 4 seconds. Then he went inside. The main room. Priest at the table, laptop open, 2 phones. Reyes on the couch, half awake. Doyle at the bar with coffee, Huck by the door. And at the far end of the room, in the chair in the corner that he'd claimed when he first patched in 6 years ago. The same chair, every time. The specific habit of a man who always needed the wall at his back and the door in his line of sight was the man whose handle was in Holt's handwritten note, in Griff's jacket pocket, in the specific weight of the last 38 minutes. His name was Creed. He'd been with the Iron Verdict for 6 years. He'd patched in the winter Griff came back from the situation in Belen. He was 38, wide through the jaw, with hands that were always slightly oil-stained from the actual mechanical work he did. Real work, good work, the kind that made you trust a person because they showed up, and they knew things, and they were useful. He'd been useful. That was the specific cruelty of it. He'd been genuinely, specifically useful for 6 years, and the useful things and the other things had been running simultaneously, and Griff had not seen it. He crossed the room. Creed looked up from his phone and read Griff's face in the 2 seconds before Griff reached him, and whatever he read there was enough. He stood up fast, chair scraping back, body going to the defensive geometry of a man who'd been caught and knew it, and hadn't decided yet whether to fight the knowledge or run from it. He didn't get the chance to decide. Griff put the folded note on the table in front of him. He didn't throw it. He didn't slam it. He set it there the way you set evidence down, deliberately, without theater. "Read it," Griff said. The room had gone completely still. Priest had closed the laptop. Reyes was off the couch. Huck had stepped back from the door, positioning. Creed looked at the note. His jaw moved once. "Griff, read it." Creed looked at it. He didn't pick it up. He didn't need to. He could see enough from where he stood. His face did something complicated. Not guilt, not exactly. More like the face of a man watching an architecture he'd built over 6 years collapse in real time, watching the weight of it shifting, watching the fall begin. "I can explain," he said. "Don't," Mara said. She'd come in behind Griff and was standing 6 feet back and to the left, and her voice had stripped itself of everything except the essential, the way voices strip themselves when emotion was too large for its container and had to be compressed. "Don't explain. Just tell me if the valley site was you." He was quiet. "The fire," she said. "The people waiting. My shoulder." She took 1 step forward. "Was that you?" "I didn't know they'd... I was just passing movement information. I didn't know what they'd do with... Was it you?" "Yes." The word arrived flat and final and seemed to cost him the structure holding up everything else. His shoulders dropped. The defensive geometry left his body. He looked at the floor. "Yes, it was me." The silence that followed had a texture like the moment before weather, like the air when pressure drops suddenly and the body registers it before the mind catches up. "Why?" Griff said. Creed looked up. His eyes were doing the thing eyes did when a person was navigating between versions of a thing, between the story they'd been telling and the story that was true. "They had something on me. From before I patched in. Something I did in another state. It was a long time ago, and I was different, and they found it, and they said if I didn't..." He stopped, breathed. "I couldn't lose this. I couldn't lose the club. You understand what this club..." He looked at Griff, at the face that was giving him nothing. "I know that's not... I know it doesn't..." 14 months, Griff said. 3 operations. The Utah case that got buried. Did you feed that too?" Creed's jaw moved. "Did you?" "Yes." The word hit the room like something physical. Reyes made a sound and then controlled it. Huck turned away for 1 second and turned back. Griff stood in front of the man who had sat in the corner chair for 6 years and eaten at the table with them, and ridden the same roads and the same cold nights, and known where they were going, and called ahead to men who wanted to stop them, and he felt nothing that was useful for the next 60 seconds. Just the thing in the place behind his eyes, the dark water, moving. He breathed through it, twice. He breathed through it the way he breathed through everything that required control to process. Then his phone rang. Priest looked at him. Griff looked at the screen. Delgado. He answered it. "He's moving," Delgado said. No preamble, no greeting, the voice of a man who'd been awake tracking movement for hours and had just seen something change. "Carver, he's not going to ground. He's moving northeast, toward the mountains, toward the cluster I flagged. But he's moving fast. Something spooked him." A pause. "I think he knows Holt talked." Griff looked at Creed. Creed looked at the floor. There was a phone on the side table beside the corner chair. Not Creed's personal phone. A second phone, smaller, prepaid, face down. It had been there all night. Griff looked at it and then looked at Creed, and the math was immediate and total. "How long ago?" Griff said to Delgado. "Maybe 40 minutes, maybe less." "The property in the mountains." "Which one?" "The seasonal property. Pinal Mountain Range. He's heading for the one Stell identified." A pause. "Griff, if he gets inside and goes dark—" "He won't get inside," Griff said. He ended the call. He looked at the room, at Priest, who was already opening the laptop, at Reyes, who was already putting his jacket on, at Huck, who was at the door, at Mara, whose face had compressed everything into a single point of direction. He looked at Creed. "Priest," he said. Priest came to the table. "Watch him," Griff said. "Not for punishment, for evidence. Everything he knows goes to the Bureau contact with everything else. She needs his testimony to close the top tier." He held Creed's gaze for a moment. "You're going to give her everything. Dates, names, contact methods, everything, because that's the only road you have left." He paused. "And because the children in that Pinal County house deserved better than what you helped do to them." Creed said nothing. His eyes were wet. Griff looked at them and felt nothing that wanted to soften. He turned away. He went outside. The bike started. His first, then Mara beside him, then Reyes and Huck and Doyle in a line behind them. The sound of it rolling through the parking lot and out into the dark. That low Harley thunder that meant direction, that meant decision, that meant people moving towards something they had committed to and were not reconsidering. The Pinal Mountains were 40 miles northeast. Carver had 40 minutes on them. Griff opened the throttle all the way. The cold hit his face like a flat hand, and he leaned into it, leaned into the speed, leaned into the empty highway that opened in front of the headlight like a sentence being written one word at a time in the dark. And the engine sound filled the space where everything else was, and the distance closed and the mountains came up ahead of them pale against the sky. And then Priest's voice in his ear, thin with static, carrying something new that arrived at the worst possible moment and opened a dimension Griff had not accounted for. "The children from the Pinal County house," Priest said. "The ones Doyle called in. Child Protective Services picked them up 2 hours ago." A pause, too long. "Griff, they went through Maricopa. The intake worker who processed them." Griff felt it before Priest said it. "She's in his office," Priest said. "She reports to him. The man above Carver." The static crackled. "The children are in the system, and the system routes through him. And we need to move faster than we are moving, because if he knows we have them, and he knows we have Holt, and he knows we have the documents—" Griff was already at 110. "How fast can your Bureau contact move?" he said. "She's in Tucson. I just called her. She's getting a car now. She's got the photographs we sent. But Griff, the originals, the metal box, it's still at the clubhouse. And Creed is at the clubhouse, and—" "Priest is with Creed," Griff said. "Priest doesn't leave that box. Priest is one person. Priest is enough." He said it with a certainty he was constructing in real time, the way certainty sometimes had to be constructed, assembled from available material, because the alternative to certainty in the next 60 seconds was not acceptable. The mountain road cut left ahead of him, narrow and climbing, the kind of road that required focus, and got it. His headlight arced across the rock face on the right side and the drop on the left, and the tire tracks in the gravel that were fresh, that were Carver's, that were 40 minutes old, that were getting less old every quarter mile. He took the turn. Behind him, 5 bikes took it in sequence, the line of them moving through the mountain dark like something that had been this way before and hadn't forgotten. And ahead, around a bend he couldn't see yet, a single light in the trees, A window, interior light, amber and small and distant, told him Carver was already inside the seasonal property, and the door was closed, and the next 60 seconds were going to determine whether the children in the Maricopa system stayed in the Maricopa system, or whether the bureau contact arrived in time to pull them out before the man above Carver understood the full shape of what was coming for him. Griff's hand was steady on the throttle. His heart was not loud. It was simply present, beating with the specific rhythm of a person who had made a decision and was executing it, who had looked at the cost and accepted it, who was riding toward a window of amber light in a mountain dark because 3 children sat in a system controlled by a man who intended to use it, because a girl had walked 43 minutes in a broken boot and asked someone to move, because moving was the only answer that had ever meant anything. He came around the bend. The property was there. Low structure, single light, Carver's truck parked at the side, no other vehicles, no indication of additional personnel. And then the light in the window went out. And the dark that replaced it was absolute and complete, and told Griff, in the specific language of situations that had gone wrong in exactly this way before, that Carver had just seen the headlights coming up the mountain road, and was already doing something about it. Griff cut his engine. Behind him, 5 engines cut in rapid sequence. Silence arrived all at once, the specific pressurized silence of 6 people and 6 bikes and 1 amber window that had just gone dark on a mountain road in December. And somewhere inside that dark, a man who had been running for 2 days and had just realized there was nowhere left to run, deciding what. Carver came out the back. He'd done the math, same math Griff had done, same calculation that said 6 bikes on a mountain road meant 1 exit, and it wasn't the front door. He went through a window on the north side of the structure, dropped onto frozen ground, and ran toward the tree line with the specific economy of a man who had rehearsed this in his mind many times and was now performing it for the first time in reality, which was always different from the rehearsal. Reyes had gone around the north side on foot before Carver's boots hit the ground. The thing about Reyes was that he was entirely silent when he moved. It was a quality that had no dramatic explanation. He'd simply been built quietly and had practiced it for a long time. He came out of the tree line before Carver reached it, and Carver pulled up short and turned, and Huck was behind him, and the tree line was ahead of him, and the mountain was to his left. And there was nowhere the math went that ended differently. He stopped. He stood in the cold dark between 2 men and looked at the structure behind him where Griff was coming through the front door, and he made the calculation that was the last calculation he had available to him, which was whether the thing he was holding, the phone he'd grabbed off the kitchen counter on his way to the window, the phone with its finger already on a contact that would close everything down, that would trigger the protocol that would burn what was left of the network and scatter the people above him and leave the children in the Maricopa system exactly where they were, was leverage or surrender. Griff walked across the frozen ground toward him. He walked without urgency. He walked the way he walked when a thing was already decided, and the remaining distance was just distance, not negotiation. His breath came out in short, pale clouds in the December cold. His hands were loose at his sides. He stopped 6 feet from Carver. "The phone," he said. Carver looked at him. His face in the dark was the face of a man who had operated in the space between systems for a very long time and had come to believe, the way people came to believe things they needed to believe, that the space was infinite, that there was always another angle, always another door, always another phone with another contact and another protocol. He looked at Griff's face. He gave him the phone. He did it the way Holt had given information in the diner, not because he was good, not because he'd arrived at anything like remorse, but because the architecture had run out and there was nothing left to hold the alternative up. Griff took it. He looked at the screen. He looked at the contact that was queued. He recognized the name. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. "Sit down," he said. Carver sat down on the frozen ground. Griff stood over him and looked at the mountains and the sky, which had begun, in the east, the specific transition from black to the deep blue that meant an hour before sunrise. That meant the night had been as long as it felt. Behind him he heard Mara's boots on the gravel. Her hand found his arm briefly, just briefly, and he felt the pressure of it through the jacket, and it was enough. He called Priest. "The box," he said. "Still here. Bureau contact is 20 minutes out." Priest's voice was steady. "And Griff, the children." She made the call. She pulled them from the Maricopa intake directly. They're going somewhere clean. He breathed out. The man above Carver, he said. She has enough, Priest said. With what we sent her, with Holt's statement, with the documents, she has enough to open it federally tonight. He doesn't know yet that it's coming. He will by morning. Yes, but by morning she'll have filed and it won't matter what he knows. Griff looked at Carver on the frozen ground. I have his phone, he said. Tell her. I'll tell her. He ended the call. He looked at the sky for a moment. The blue was deepening in the east. Somewhere in the mountains, a bird made a single sound and stopped. It was over. Not cleanly. Nothing like this ended cleanly. There was Creed still to deal with, and the testimony and the federal process that would take months and cost people things they didn't know, yet they'd have to pay. There was Mara's shoulder and the 3 children from the Pinal County house who were somewhere in a system that was hopefully clean now, who would carry what had happened to them for the rest of their lives in the specific way children carried things. There was Holt, who would face a cell and had earned it and would spend years in it, and that was the correct outcome, and also an incomplete one. The way justice was always incomplete against what it was trying to address, but it was over in the way that mattered. Carver was on the ground. The phone was in Griff's pocket. The bureau contact was 20 minutes from the metal box under the sink. The network's architecture, the tiers and the nodes and the string on the corkboard, was about to be handed to people who could pull it apart properly, from the outside, without any channel running through the man whose name was on the documents. He looked at Mara. She looked back. Good, she said. Just that. Teach. The drive back down the mountain took longer than the drive up. They rode slowly in the pre-dawn dark. The cold different now than it had been. Still present, still thorough, but carrying something the cold before hadn't carried. Not warmth, not its absence. Just a different quality of weather after a different kind of night. Griff rode point and let the road come to him. He thought about Creed. He thought about 6 years in the corner chair and the oil-stained hands and the work that had been real alongside the work that hadn't been. He thought about what it meant to be a person who held 2 things simultaneously and what it cost the people adjacent to the seam. He thought about whether he'd missed something and concluded that he had. Not a glaring thing, not an obvious thing, but a thing that would have been visible with a different kind of attention, and the fact that he hadn't paid it was information he would carry. Not as punishment, as learning. There was a distinction, and it mattered. He thought about Nora, the way she'd sat in the hallway with Bishop and her father's watch, checking the door every hour. The way she'd said, be careful with the full, uncalculated weight of someone who meant it absolutely. The way she'd taken information about terrible things and held herself still beneath it and asked the right questions anyway, and the way her father was present in all of it, in the watch and in the wolf, and in the specific quality of her steadiness, which was clearly inherited, which was clearly something he'd given her before the accident had taken him. He thought about what she'd be like at 20, at 30. He thought she'd be formidable. He thought that was the least she deserved to be Charson. The clubhouse at sunrise looked different than the clubhouse at any other hour. The orange and red lights along the roofline went dark when the sky lightened, and without them the building was just a building. Concrete and weathered paint, and the honest wear of a place that had been used hard for a long time. The parking lot held the bikes in a loose arrangement, each one particular, each one carrying the specific history of its rider in its scratches and modifications, and the small personal objects some of the men attached to their handlebars or mirrors. It looked like what it was. Griff had always appreciated that. It had never tried to look like anything else. The bureau contact's car was parked at the side. 2 people, as promised, her and one other, both in civilian clothes, both carrying the specific quality of people who had been awake all night for the right reasons. Griff went inside. Nora was awake. He'd expected nothing different. She was in the main room, sitting at the table where the documents had been, which were no longer there. The metal box was open and being processed at the far end of the room by the bureau contact and her colleague, working methodically, speaking quietly. The careful, controlled energy of people who understood what they were handling. Nora was watching them with the expression she wore when she was processing something and hadn't finished. She looked up when Griff came in. He sat down across from her. She looked at his face, the full inventory of it, the specific reading of a child who had been reading adult faces carefully for a long time. "You got him," she said. "Yes." "And the kids from the other house?" "Somewhere safe, being looked after." She nodded. Her hands were flat on the table. Bishop was beside them, sitting up, the black stitching on his left flank catching the early morning light. "There was someone in the club," she said. He looked at her. "I heard some of it," she said. "Not apologetic, just informational. Through the wall, I heard priests say—" She stopped. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to—" "I know," he said. She was quiet for a moment. "Is he gone?" "He's going to the right people, with everything he knows." He held her gaze. "He'll face what he did." She turned her father's watch over in her hands once, twice. "That must have been really hard," she said. "For you." He looked at her. At the 8-year-old who was asking him, without performance, without condescension, dressed up as empathy, whether he was okay, asking it the way her father would have asked it, with the weight behind it. "Yes," he said. "It was." She nodded. That was enough for her. She didn't push it further. She didn't need to. "What happens now?" she said. "Now there are people whose job is to take what we have and do the rest of it correctly. Courts, filings, the process." He paused. "It'll take time. It's not exciting, but it'll hold. And the man above Carver, he'll know by this morning. He won't be able to stop it." He paused. "He'll try. He won't succeed." She thought about this. Because she has the documents. Yes. And Holt's statement. Yes. And Carver. Yes. She put her hand on Bishop, just rested it there. "Okay," she said. The same word she'd said in the early morning when everything was still uncertain, but different now. The same word carrying different weight. The weight of something that had been resolved rather than something being absorbed. She looked at the bureau contact across the room, then back at Griff. "My dad used to say that the world was mostly people trying to do the right thing badly," she said. "And then a few people doing the wrong thing very well. And the question was always, which group was paying attention?" She looked at Bishop's black stitching. He said the paying attention part was everything. Griff was quiet for a moment. "He was right," he said. She nodded, like she'd needed to hear it confirmed, like confirmation from someone who'd paid attention was the thing that made it fully true. The months that followed were ordinary in the ways that mattered. Diane Ellison came back to herself slowly, the way a person came back from something that had been done to them chemically and psychologically over a long period, not in a single morning, not dramatically, but in increments that accumulated into a direction. She got a job at a diner in a neighboring town. She enrolled Caleb in a school where his teacher noticed him and called her when good things happened, not just bad ones. She started sleeping through the night in late February, which was not a small thing, which was in fact a significant thing that she noted in a journal she kept and told no one about. Caleb's ribs healed. He discovered that he liked drawing motorcycles, which made certain people in the iron verdict unreasonably happy. The federal investigation moved the way federal investigations moved, slowly, with paperwork, with delays that felt unbearable, and then resolved, with hearings that Griff attended as a witness and gave his testimony in the flat, complete way he gave information, and with outcomes that arrived in courthouse language stripped of the emotion that had generated them. The man above Carver lost his position, then his clearance, then his freedom. Carver received a sentence that was long enough to mean something. Holt received a lesser sentence in exchange for testimony that was comprehensive and, in the end, useful. Creed cooperated fully, as Griff had told him he would, and his testimony closed 3 cases that had been open for years. The 3 children from the Pinell County house went to a placement that Priest's bureau contact monitored personally. The youngest, the dark-haired girl who had held out her arms in that room and tucked her face against Griff's shoulder, was placed with a family in Tucson. Priest got one update, months later. She was doing well. She was 4, nearly 5. She liked dogs and loud music and the color orange. Griff read that and folded the paper and put it in the drawer of his desk at the clubhouse and didn't take it out again because he didn't need to. It was there. That was enough. Mara's shoulder healed correctly. She did not acknowledge this at any point as a significant event. The night before the final sentencing hearing, Nora came to the clubhouse. Not alone. Diane drove her, waited in the car with Caleb, who had fallen asleep against the window with a drawing of a motorcycle in his lap. Nora came in through the front door the same way she'd come in the first time, except that this time she didn't stop. This time she walked directly to the corner of the room where Griff was sitting with coffee and a map he wasn't really reading, and she sat down across from him, and she put Bishop on the table. She looked at the wolf, at the black stitching on his flank. "I don't need to carry him everywhere anymore," she said. "But I wanted you to see him." She paused. "Before tomorrow." He looked at Bishop, at the one remaining button eye, at the black thread that had been sewn with whatever was available by a man who wasn't a seamstress but was present, and tried. "He looks good," Griff said. "He's been through a lot," she said. "He's okay anyway." She picked him up and held him for a moment. Then she looked at Griff with the direct, undeflected look of someone who had something to say and had decided to say it. "I know you're not family," she said. "I know that's not. I know what this is. I know you have your thing, and we have ours, and it's not the same." She held his gaze. "But you moved. When I asked. And that's—" She stopped, started again more simply. "Thank you for moving." He looked at her for a long moment. "You walked 43 minutes in a broken boot," he said. "In the cold. For your brother." He paused. "Thank you for walking." She almost smiled. Not quite, but almost. The specific almost smile of someone for whom smiling still required a reason, who didn't give it away casually, which meant when it came, it meant something. She picked up Bishop. She stood up. "Tell Mara her shoulder looks better," she said. "She'll deny it." "I know. Tell her anyway." She went to the door, stopped with her hand on it. "The drawing Caleb made," she said without turning. "The motorcycle. He wants to give it to Trace. He said Trace has a daughter and maybe she'd like it." She paused. "He's been thinking about that for 2 weeks." Griff looked at the door. "I'll tell him," he said. She went out. He sat with his coffee and the map he wasn't reading and the empty table where Bishop had been for a moment, and he listened to the car start in the parking lot and pull out onto the road and drive away into the Arizona night, which was cold and clear and full of distance in every direction, the way the desert was full of distance, which was not emptiness, had never been emptiness, but was simply space, simply room, simply the particular freedom of a landscape that didn't ask you to be smaller than you were. He drank his coffee. Outside, the last of the evening's cold moved through the parking lot and over the bikes standing there and out toward the highway where it joined the rest of the night moving east. The Harleys sat quiet. They'd run again tomorrow. Long roads and cold air and the specific weight of men who had been through things, carrying those things the way they always carried them. Not lightly, not easily, but forward, always forward. The weight distributed differently now, shared. The way weight got shared when people had been somewhere hard together and come back. Mara came in from the back room with her own coffee and sat at the bar without saying anything, and Griff didn't say anything either, and that was its own kind of language. The comfortable, unhurried language of two people who didn't need to fill silence to be present in it. Trace came in a few minutes later, and Reyes after that, and Huck. And the room filled in the way rooms filled when people belonged in them. And somebody put music on low, and the coffee kept going, and the night kept going, and the road outside kept going in both directions toward everything that was still ahead. On the bar, between two coffee mugs, Trace set a small piece of folded paper. He smoothed it open. A pencil drawing of a motorcycle. Careful, detailed, the work of a 5-year-old who'd been looking closely. He looked at it for a long moment, at the careful lines and the slightly crooked wheels and the big engine drawn with obvious love. He folded it again. He put it in his jacket pocket, over his chest. He picked up his coffee. Outside, the highway ran east toward the mountains and west toward the valley, and straight through the cold December dark in every direction it went. And somewhere on it, the ordinary world was doing what it did. Trucks running freight, families sleeping, children dreaming in rooms that were safe or not safe. The whole enormous, ordinary complexity of people trying and failing and trying again to be decent to each other across all the distance between them. The iron verdict sat in the middle of it. Not above it, not outside it. In it. The way they'd always been. The coffee was good. The night was long. And somewhere on a shelf in a house in Dura Flats, a stuffed gray wolf with one button eye and black stitching on his left flank sat beside a child who was sleeping for the first time in almost a year without listening for something to go wrong. Sleeping with both hands open, with her breath slow and even and her face at rest, with the whole quiet weight of a night that had nothing terrible in it pressing down soft and warm and complete. End.